Hello, hello.
How is your name pronounced? Shajla?
Çağla. Çağla.
Chala. So the G is not pronounced. It's
Yes,
silent.
yes, it's silent, and the first letter is ç.
Chala.
Yes,
Okay, nice.
exactly.
Okay, thank you for teaching me basic,
Thank
basic,
you.
basic Turkish.
Yes, yes. Thank you for being here. Merhaba, Eli Somer aramızda. Kendisi bizi kırmadılar ve bir görüşme ayarlayabildik kendisiyle. Bir takım sorularım var kendisine ve hiç bilmiyormuş gibi yaklaşacağım dinleyicilerimi düşünerek ve kendisi karşımızda. Welcome, Professor Somer. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking this call.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. Now I have some basic questions for you. Could you please introduce yourself for us, your area of research and expertise, so that we can introduce you?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist with an expertise in trauma. Throughout the years, I've worked with the Holocaust survivors, with the war veterans, and mostly with survivors of childhood trauma of various kinds. And at some point in my career, in my clinic, which specializes in these populations, I've I've sort of noticed that several of my clients were talking about a very interesting method of coping with their pain, with their distress, uh, by going away into their fantasies. And so that I described this phenomena, but they were spending many hours every day in this, so I described it in the first paper. So I'm a trauma psychologist who developed an interest in this very intense form of fantasy, and this is what I've been doing in the past 20 years.
I can see that you also struggle with calling this a disorder before it's in the DSM. Can we really say that it's a disorder between us? We call it that, but are we sure or?
Well, you're absolutely right in observing that when I initially coined the term in this first paper, I thought it would have been too presumptuous to call it daydreaming disorder because I'm just describing a group of six patients, phenomena that is of interest, but I was very cautious. So I chose this name, which is somewhat awkward, and in many languages it doesn't have a very elegant translation. And I believe that when it ends up being listed in the DSM, that the word disorder will appear there because this is not a normal way of daydreaming. We
Really?
can call it a disorder because uh, it is associated with a lot of other mental disorders. When it is, of course, the question is what makes a psychological phenomenon a disorder? And my suggestion is to stick to the DSM criteria. So when it creates distress
Mhm.
and when it interferes with normal functioning, then it's a disorder. So without these two criteria, we can call it absorptive daydreaming or immersive daydreaming, which is a trait. It's not a disorder. It's like a talent that some people have. And I don't have it, by the way, the ability to visualize very vividly. So it's all a question of degree, of how much time people invest in this, how many hours a day they spend in it, and what are the consequences of spending time in fantasy rather than real life. Some people report that it inspires them. It inspires their creativity. So this would not be classified as maladaptive daydreaming. But many people, those who are in contact with me, share with me their pain, that they are trapped in their fantasy and they're wasting their life away in daydreaming. And their hearts are broken because they need help and when they go to the doctors, they are being dismissed. As you have, that's not a disorder, it's something normal. So they don't feel that they're being listened to. So these kind of emails that I've been receiving from the public out there, from the consumers, uh, has motivated and still motivates me to work very hard to produce credible scientific knowledge about the validity of this condition so it will be recognized and included eventually in the DSM.
You are confident about this
Yes, I
finding.
am. Yes, I am. And it's not just my personally invested interest that it would be. It's not about that. This is a consensus now uh, among leading mental health professionals. We have published this year a paper in the prestigious British Journal of Psychiatry with some 23 co-authors and co-signatories, former presidents of the International Society for Trauma and Dissociation, the European Society of Trauma and Dissociation, leading clinicians and researchers in the field that claim that maladaptive daydreaming is a dissociative disorder and that it should be included in the DSM. So, and this opinion paper was, of course, backed by scientific evidence. So
Yes, of course.
the science speaks for itself. The evidence speaks.
That is great to hear. And you are very uh, optimistic about getting this into DSM. And this is great to see from you specifically.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I am.
Um, Great.
It's a political process. I mean, so the construct is ready to be included, at least to be mentioned in the DSM initially as a condition that requires further research. I'll be happy if we get a foot in the door like this.
Yes, yes. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of how you come across this? What made you really go, oh, this is something important, this is something new?
Yeah, sure. I already alluded to it, but I will elaborate. So, as I told you, most of my career and clinical life and scientific life has been dedicated to the treatment and study of traumatized individuals who uh, cope with their trauma by various dissociative mechanisms. For example, dissociative amnesia,
Mhm.
not to remember something that is very difficult to remember. This is not that the memory is erased, but the memory is not accessible. It is compartmentalized. The mind is split. Part remembers, part doesn't remember. That part is able to function without the burden of the trauma. I'm interested in that, in these wonderful activities of the mind. It's really almost like magic. Another form of dissociative coping with trauma that interests me, and it's all related eventually to maladaptive daydreaming in some form, is derealization, depersonalization. So that's the process of people that are experiencing overwhelming stress that they cannot escape to pretend that the reality is not real. So that's derealization. So that makes it easier for them. Or that the inescapable pain that they experience in their bodies does not matter so much because they don't feel their body. They are capable of ignoring the pain. So that's depersonalization, or it doesn't happen to them. They don't feel like they're in their body. And of course, the most extreme form of dissociation is to pretend that the trauma does not happen to me. It happens to her,
Mm.
to another identity. So it is within this context that, and these are most of my clients still, at least half of my clients today are people with severe dissociative disorders, that some patients with a lot of hesitation and with embarrassment shared with me in the beginning, they were just hinting about it. That they spent a lot of time in their own minds, in their own heads. And when I got curious about it, asking for more information, uh, it turned out that they are self-treating themselves with alternative scenarios of their lives. So some of them were creating, for example, idealized families, idealized families that they never had and that they don't have, in which they are protected and validated and loved and being taken care of. Families of origin and also families that they have created themselves with partners that respect them and protect them. And that these images were experienced as extremely powerful and emotionally appealing, emotionally activating. So they prefer to stay there in these fantasies because it also was an alternative to experiencing the pain of the reality they're living in, the reality of loneliness and bad memories. So some of them were inventing idealized families. Others uh, were belittled and humiliated and abused emotionally, were imagining that they are popular, that they are very successful, that they are being respected, that they have fantastic achievements in real life that is being recognized and feeling empowered in their fantasies. And that was very appealing to them. And they, of course, would prefer to spend more and more time doing that. Others were expressing their anger in I mean, this is the first six patients, yes? So one
Yes.
was expressing um, his anger that he could not express directly because the abusers were the parents that he also loved, but they were also very abusive. So in his fantasies, he was uh, creating World War III with nuclear explosions in which he was destroying whole cities and whole countries. I mean, very powerful images, graphical images of death, fire, explosions, and destruction. And that gave him pleasure. In reality, he was a very docile man, very gentle, docile man. But this was a way to experience a forbidden feeling. A
Yeah,
forbi-
our shadow side kind of finds a place to flourish a little bit, show
exactly.
itself, and yeah.
So, and at this point, we're talking about the turn of the millennium. It was around 2000, 2001. I had six patients like this. So they were a large enough group to draw my attention. And I
Yeah.
told myself, well, maybe this is a phenomenon. And I believed at the time, wrongly, by the way, I found out later, that this is exclusively a trauma-related mechanism. I later found out that you don't need trauma to have maladaptive daydreaming, although it is a predictor. It is related to trauma. And I wrote this first paper, uh, being convinced that maybe I've come across another form of dissociation, trauma-related dissociation. As I told you, there was no response. There was no, it was ignored completely, and I dropped it. And then after a few years, I continued to search the internet and I found out that a group in New York published, I think, one or two papers talking about excessive fantasy. And I realized that they were probably treating the same thing or referring to the same thing. So I wrote to them, we collaborated, we produced a few more papers. And then the public started writing to me. The
Mhm.
public, people started imploring me, requesting that I continue to generate knowledge in this area. And the rest is history because
Yeah.
I've been doing nothing else in the past 20 years. And people continue to write to me and sharing with me how significant it is for them that the knowledge I produce helps them be validated realizing that they are not the only ones and that there is hope.
So, what I understand is you chose the name maladaptive daydreaming when you thought this was a trauma-related disorder.
Correct. At the time when I coined the term, I was convinced that it is a post-traumatic condition. But now I know that extensive trauma can lead to this. But of course, what needs to happen is, of course, a child that is abandoned, lonely, or traumatized must also have the ability to fantasize. Many children have the ability, this natural ability. For example, the phenomena of the imaginary friend
Yeah.
that children have. It's normal phenomena that children, and we're not concerned that the children are hallucinating when they're talking about their imaginary friends. So the child must have the ability to fantasize very vividly, and then the intersection of a difficult reality and the ability to create an alternate fantastical reality shapes the tendency of some of these children to remain immersed in their fantasies. But what we have learned is that since this is an innate trait, people are just born with it. As I told you, I was not born with it. I don't have it. Uh, and they can discover it by accident. The ability to just rock and go away in their fantasy to a different world and enjoy it. So some people discover it without a pre-existing trauma, and they like it too much and get addicted to it. But then again, you can ask the question, but why do they get addicted to it? Why do they prefer their fantasy over the real connections and real life? That's an interesting question. So we do have some evidence that uh, attachment styles are relevant here. So it remains an open question because attachment style, of course, is affected by early relationship with the parents. Why do people become addicted? And a very widely accepted answer is that it serves as self-medication.
Personally, one could argue that even playing with dolls requires some kind of imagination and some
True.
kind of immersive abilities for a child to truly learn about society. Children learn through games, and just by playing dolls and any other imaginary game, this door actually opens, and uh,
True.
we might like it, and anything we like can be addictive as long as we have very easy access to it.
I agree with you. So this is an altered state of consciousness that is readily available. Exists between the ears of many individuals, and it is legal and it is free. It doesn't cost any money. Hmm.
Yes, yes, exactly. So you have been working on this particular disorder for a long time now. In time, what could you say that ex exceptionally that changed? I mean, what is radically changed since you've started
In,
working on this?
in terms of our knowledge,
In terms of knowledge, in terms of perspective, for example, you also said that you thought this was a trauma-related thing, but it is a great discovery that it is not. Any person with a particular set of skills can develop this. So, is there anything else that we can add
but
to this?
when it becomes when it is a disorder, when it meets the suggested diagnostic criteria that includes distress, emotional distress, and functional impairment, we know that it is also associated with many other psychological conditions. So we don't know what the causality, we don't know the direction of the cause and effect, but people with maladaptive daydreaming, many people with maladaptive daydreaming that have distress and functional impairment also have attention deficit. And the attention, it's not, they may meet the diagnostic criteria of ADHD, but
Mhm.
they are not, but some of them are have attention deficits because their attention is directed internally. So they are forgetful what they put where they put their keys, or have they done their shopping or not, because they live inside. So it's not the classical ADHD. Maybe there is a subtype because we found that 77% of people with maladaptive daydreaming have attention deficit problems,
Yes.
but it's a very high comorbidity. But
Mhm.
when we go to a sample of people with ADHD, only 20%, 22% have maladaptive daydreaming.
Mhm.
So it's not the same. It's not the same. So we know that there are attention problems. We know that there is depression and anxiety uh, and obsessive compulsive disorder. People, some people with OCD and maladaptive daydreaming try to perfect their fantasy again, over and over and over and over, and it's endless because their obsessive compulsive disorder feeds in. And many people who wake up from a very enjoyable fantasy that has taken 6, 7 hours of their waking time wake up to realize that they've accomplished nothing. In the fantasy, there were concert violinists playing as soloists in the most wonderful symphonic orchestras in the world, but in reality, they have not practiced. They have not advanced themselves, and that creates depression and anxiety. But you could also argue that depression and anxiety prevents from practice and leads people to fantasize. So
Yeah.
we don't know the direction, but it is associated in many cases with pain and despair. They also feel alone because to fantasize, they cannot be in proximity of other people because relating to other people contradicts daydreaming. You relating to other people requires that you direct your attention outside,
Yes.
and fantasizing directs the attention inside. So people prevent them from daydreaming if they need to interact with others. And also, many of them realize they know the difference between reality and fantasy, and some of them act out their fantasies and they talk out loud, they pace, they know they look funny, so they feel embarrassed. So this creates, is associated also with loneliness, with social anxiety. We also find an increased representation of people with maladaptive daydreaming among neurodivergent people, people with autism spectrum disorder. And again, it is possible that people with autism who have anxiety about relating to other people and have this ability to fantasize prefer the sense of control that they have in their fantasies and they prefer it to the anxiety they experience interacting with others. So there's a lot of evidence that this condition is related to other psychiatric disorders, which is very similar to other mental conditions listed in the DSM. A
Which is
lot of
expected,
conditions,
yes.
a lot of conditions in the DSM are comorbid with others. So it behaves like a psychiatric condition.
Yes. Can we talk about any root causes of MD?
Well, we know that a necessary condition must be, of course, the ability for immersive daydreaming, this trait that sometimes I call it a talent because it's a gift. So this is a one root cause. But then one could argue, and we did talk about it, that people must have a motivation to spend their life in fantasy rather than in real life, that they prefer their imaginary world to the circumstances of their real life. And There could be a variety of reasons: loneliness, feeling of despair, social isolation, uh, and bad memories. Could be some reasons that would motivate people. And of course, other forms of psychological pain, depression and anxiety could lead someone to fantasize an idealized self that is self-confident and happy and cheerful and being a leader and popular and so on and so forth. However, if their positive experiences are limited only to their fantasies and they wake up to a reality of them being isolated in the room for hours, the outcome is a deeper depression. So this is a vicious cycle that should be broken.
What
Shall
kind
we?
of treatments or methods do you suggest for people with MD?
I think that the best model to consider is the treatment of addictions. So first, we need to monitor the amount of time spent in fantasy because people underestimate how much time they spend in their addiction, how addicted they are. They are motivated to underestimate it. So first of all, we must help the people quantify the degree, the magnitude of their problem. So monitoring is important also for self-accountability, but not only for accountability, but also to monitor the treatment, if it is effective or not. So we start with self-monitoring. The other aspect, again, this is borrowed from the treatment experience with addictive disorder, is to create the motivation that is needed to overcome an addiction. Because addictions, by definition, are extremely gratifying. Initially, extremely rewarding. Of course, it has a price tag attached to it,
Mm.
but the drug or the addictive behavior like gambling or sexual addiction creates a rush, a nice feeling. So people need to articulate for themselves what are the prices that they pay for this pleasurable mental activity. What are they losing if they're not changing it? And what do they stand to gain if they get better control over this mental activity? And we help these people, we help our clients identify these ideas that come from them. It's not, we're not preaching anything. We try to induce them to generate these motivations. We try to formulate it into brief sentences that will be inspiring, like, I don't want to be a daydreaming addict. I refuse to waste my life away in fantasy. Or if I want to achieve anything, I must focus on my real life rather than on the fantasy's life. I mean, examples of sentences
That
that
life is good, that life is worth living in.
exactly. And
Uh,
if it is not, I need to work on making my life a better place. And then we teach them mindfulness. This is now a very popular trend in mental health because they are absolutely mindless, not mind, the opposite of mindful about their external environment. Because they prefer to live inside. So if they are motivated to be more aware of their presence, we teach them these basic Buddhist skills that science tells us that is very helpful about being aware of the present moment, living in the here and now, being aware of the sounds, of the smells, of the sensations, and they need to be trained in doing that.
Experiencing life in our own body. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So this in itself, we did a randomized clinical trial with only 8 sessions. And so these components by themselves were very helpful in reducing. the amount of time spent in maladaptive daydreaming and improved different psychological indices. But this is not enough because um, I talked earlier about maladaptive daydreaming as a form of addictive self-medication. For some people, it is a self-medication. So, for the achievement to be sustainable, long-term, and stable, we must identify if there are any underlying issues that the people self-treat with this escapism into fantasy. And if there are underlying issues, they could be shyness, social anxiety, issues in self-confidence. Uh,
Maybe being disappointed about life.
yes,
Basically.
yes, yes. Disappointed about life, disappointed about self, being self-critical, or bad memories of childhood, bad childhood memories, of traumatic experiences, PTSD symptoms. So if there are any underlying issues, they of course must be addressed. So it's a two-pronged type of treatment. One is cognitive behavioral focused on the symptoms and reducing, helping the patients gain control over the symptoms of the mental behavior of the addiction. But the other goes deeper and could be much longer term that deals with the difficulties of being present in the world.
Thank you. Great, comprehensive answer. What are the chances of complete recovery, do you think?
I think the chances are good. It is not easy to recover from any addiction for the obvious reasons. And we do have evidence. There has been this year a brain imaging study conducted on a patient with maladaptive daydreaming, and her data were compared to hundreds of normal people without this condition. Functional MRI study shows that areas in the brain that are associated with gratification are highly active during maladaptive daydreaming. So, it is very much like an addiction. So the challenge is great, but it is possible. And then, now let's go back to the question: is what is complete recovery? Complete recovery does not mean to stop daydreaming, because daydreaming is a normal mental activity. We're
Thank you
talking.
for stating this, to be honest. To my viewers, I keep saying this, but hearing this from you is important.
Okay. So the only issue here is that this is a very powerful form of daydreaming. But the ideal outcome is for people to be able to do it creatively, to do it for their entertainment when they want to do it, and rather than have the daydreaming intrude into their life. So if people daydream on the train, or on the bus, or when they jog, or for half an hour before going to bed, that's great. That's no problem with that. The goal is not to abolish it, but to create a situation where people are not distressed or impaired by this anymore. So we want to create a situation when people work proactively, um, productively to advance their goals in life. And when they do that, we're talking about well-adjusted individuals who also have a talent and ability to do something very fun that I can unfortunately cannot do, and create alternative situations in their mind. This can help them solve problems, write a story or a novel or a screenplay, creatively solve computer problems. Or I mean, and people tell me that they get immersed sometimes in their fantasy, and it helps them create solutions for real life issues. So it is possible, and because I've been involved in this subject for some time, I get, of course, referrals or self-referrals of individuals who want to be treated by me. So I have gained some experience in this, and I can tell you it is treatable. Often people don't require very long treatments to control their excessive daydreaming, but sometimes they can benefit from longer term therapy that deals with the underlying issues. But I'm absolutely confident the evidence, the scientific evidence and the clinical evidence show that it is treatable.
Great, great. Do you think MD is a new disorder or that it went unnoticed in the past, or is it something new? The modern life brought it up, perhaps.
Of course, it was not. It is not related to technology. This is something that is associated with the nature of the human being. People are capable of imagining, and some people are capable of imagining more clearly and more vividly. We have evidence from the literature,
Mhm.
different fiction literature in which writers were describing this phenomenon very clearly. And I'm in the process of collaborating now with another uh, scholar on writing a paper of maladaptive daydreaming in fiction, in the literature. By the way, I think writers must have the trait of immersive daydreaming because before they create these complex scripts with deep psychological insights of feelings and interactions and unfolding storylines, they must imagine it first.
Yeah, yes.
And so I'm sure the condition, of course, was not born in 2002 when I coined the term. But your question is still very valid because I think that in westernized societies, we may have more of this compared to traditional societies where people live in big families, constant interactions, many generations living together, or close communities like in small villages, where people cannot isolate themselves as they do perhaps in the anonymous uh, big city where people are alienated and sometimes don't know who their neighbors are. So
Yeah,
loneliness can be associated with it, and I believe that loneliness is less prevalent in traditional communities. There are other problems in traditional communities, but loneliness is not. Maybe there's too little loneliness in traditional communities, but people don't have a chance to withdraw internally. I would also add, and this relates to the issue of isolation, that we saw a spike in Google searches of maladaptive daydreaming during COVID.
yes.
So during COVID, people were searching it because they were more aware. So here we see the effect of isolation, forced isolation, on people suddenly discovering that they have an outlet. And some of them probably were concerned that they prefer to be inside rather than in the boring confines of their isolated apartments. And there were, so we see many more searches during COVID time about maladaptive dating. So there is probably some relationship between this phenomena and external, maybe political developments or such major global health threats like COVID. There could be a relationship between internet addiction
Mm.
and maladaptive daydreaming. There could be because it serves similar purposes of distracting
Mhm.
from the presence and from interacting. And it could be gratifying because you know when I recently signed up on TikTok and I can see how you can scroll through these brief episodes and some of them are very interesting because TikTok somehow their algorithm pick up on what interests you and you have an alternative world of something that you like. To make the answer shorter, It existed undoubtedly before I coined the term, but the alienated modern society may perhaps put pressure on people to escape their loneliness in the big anonymous cities into their fantasy life where they can find friendship and family and support.
I would expect a shepherd to have something like this, perhaps, especially children. That's an idea, that's
Uh,
a thought.
That's an interesting thought. And I was, as you were talking about it, I was thinking about another population, prisoners.
Yes, prisoners, that's true. That's
Mhm.
true. Yeah, someday people will work on this, I hope.
There's
Ideas.
so much to study and
Yes,
investigate in so little time.
yes. If we make a main list between a maladaptive daydreamer and an immersive daydreamer, which we said was healthy, and the maladaptive daydreamer are the people who need a specific kind of help, perhaps. Could we make a small list, perhaps, between the differences about this?
Between maladaptive
And
daydreaming and immersive.
immersive daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming, yes.
Well, I think that we can rely on the simple DSM criteria. Does it create distress? Does it create impairment? Even dissociative identity disorder, this very severe and dramatic disorder of people having several identities because of trauma, even then, if you read the DSM, they specify they specify the symptoms, but necessary conditions to nail down the diagnosis is distress and dysfunction. So it is possible that people will have different identities, but if they function well and they feel good, they cannot be diagnosed as having DAD, although they have different identities, because
Yeah.
it's not disorder. They have identity, they have dissociative identities, but it's not a disorder. So I suggest we stick to this. Absolutely necessary condition that will differentiate it from immersive daydreaming will not necessarily be the time, but the impact.
Can we say there is a particular group at risk? Usually, the young people are coming to me in Turkey about this issue, mostly, I can say. Is there a risk group or some way we can foresee that a group of people, a particular um, group can be vulnerable to this?
Well, young age is a risk factor if you want to say being female, and I don't know why is that. This could be an artifact because women are would much more readily discuss emotional problems than men. They don't they have less of a men because of the masculine pride hide the emotional problems. So we have a higher representation of women in all mental health research. I don't think it's because women are necessarily more vulnerable, but in maladaptive daydreaming, the ratio between male and females is like two-thirds to 70% female to about 30% male. Uh, but again, we don't know if this is the real prevalence or does it reflect the willingness to admit and to come forward and participate in such studies? Well, childhood trauma, loneliness, emotional neglect during childhood, current life loneliness, social anxiety, avoidant personality disorder, autism are some of the risk factors uh, that come to my mind.
Right now, since it is not on the DSM, since the diagnostic books doesn't include this disorder, when we go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, when an MDR goes to, what could be the diagnosis they face? What is it most confused with, do you think?
Because of the comorbidities, what mental health professionals do, and I don't blame them for it, they diagnose what they are familiar with. So when they identify the comorbidities, they diagnose depression, OCD, anxiety, and some of them dismiss the daydreaming as something that is incidental, that is not the primary issue. I have heard from patients and from people who write to me from the worldwide community that some psychiatrists believe that these fantasies are hallucinations because they're so vivid, and they diagnose them with schizophrenia, which is a gross mistake because in schizophrenia, the hallucinations are very short, commanding, commenting voices that come from the outside. And in maladaptive daydreaming, we're talking about elaborate, rich scenarios that the person develops, and it comes from the inside. And people with maladaptive daydreaming differentiate very well, in most cases, uh, th- between their fantasy and reality. In schizophrenia, this is not the case. In schizophrenia, you have these negative symptoms like not taking care of themselves, dull speech, lack of motivation, flat affect, flat emotions. All of this does not exist in most cases in maladaptive daydreaming. On the contrary, they're very alive with their pain, with their and but they are, even if they are maladaptive, most people take care of themselves because they don't neglect their physical appearance and so on. So these are just examples of how different these two disorders are. Still, some patients, particularly from remote countries, report to me that they've been prescribed antipsychotic medication and they feel that it doesn't affect their daydreaming
Nature.
at all. Of course, if you over medicate, you give high dosage of antipsychotic medication, you could also make an elephant go to sleep. At some point they stop daydreaming because they're completely drugged. But that's not a cure to maladaptive daydreaming. We At this point we are convinced that the avenue for treatment is psychotherapy and not medication. But to answer your question, it is either dismissed or the comorbidities are being diagnosed, or it's diagnosed as schizophrenia. Sometimes it's diagnosed as ADHD,
Mhm.
an attention deficit, which is not far,
Fundamentally
not
different.
far from the truth because they have attention problems, but their attention problems come from their fantasizing.
Yes, yes, I understand. I've read that paper very carefully because it made a lot of sense to me. I was a maladaptive daydreamer during my own young years.
But what helped you overcome it? What helped you gain control over it?
Um, First, I made some kind of a schedule for myself. I I took my daydreaming hours and put them in walking. There was a specific time allocated for me to daydream instead of having it happen all the time.
Good idea. Hmm. Yeah.
Yes, and I've started using them in terms of getting to know my own shadow, what is distressing me, since these are very much like dreams, actually. As once you learn to decipher dreams, you can actually decipher daydreams as
That's
well.
true. That's true.
So I got to understand myself from these, and as I understood more of myself, some other problems has alleviated and came into my attention. For example, family issues. For example, the desire to be this, that for others. So I worked on that in like so. The real progress was made when I started writing. especially when I started to put it into form. These daydreams were something to be shown to other people at some point, perhaps. Uh,
Mm,
Turning it into a production process really changed the way it's functioned for me as well.
mm.
So I constantly tell my consultees or the young people that come to me to make arts in any form, any shape or form, as long as you make your daydreams useful. So I started doing lots of paintings lately.
That's wonderful. Like those hanging behind you?
Yes, there are like 20 different pictures right here in
Wonderful.
this room.
And are you playing music also? I see an instrument behind you.
Yes, there's a cello here. I didn't touch it for a long time, but for a while I played, yes.
It's a wonderful instrument. It's almost like a human voice.
Yes, exactly. It's very close to a human voice. And one last thing. All right, how do you find the psychologies as a science approach to arts processes of human behavior? I've read Csikszentmihalyi, if I can pronounce it well. He talks about a flow understanding where we focus on something outside of ourselves, actually, even if it's constructing a daydream. It's something outside ourselves in a way. We forget ourselves. Our ego is on hold. We get into a flow, and this brings joy. That's what he
That's true.
says.
I've just started learning about flow, about this concept, so I'm not an expert on it, but I am convinced that these fantasy processes are very much related to creativity. And in fact, there is one paper or two papers that I've been involved with that documented that people with maladaptive dating have higher scores on creativity, but they don't score highly at all on measures of productivity. So they are creative, but because they are maladaptive daydreamers, they don't implement their creativity. So they have the capacity to be creative, but the maladaptation, the pathology of their condition prevents them from working hard to achieving these goals because they achieve them in their fantasy only. So creativity, so this trait of immersive daydreaming and this process of flow, to my mind, is central in the process of creativity in composing music, in writing screenplay, and in writing fiction. But this is a study that is still under-researched.
I am also thankful, very thankful in place of Reyhan. I also thank you for being here. You gave your time and effort to
My
explain
pleasure.
this to
My
us.
pleasure. And if anything emerges from this project, I'm eager to know. Share it with me.
I will definitely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.